right. So, Chris, this is very exciting.
Yeah, well, I'm here with Claire. She's done with her first semester at Syracuse University, and I thought, since we're in the neighborhood, right, why not stop by and see your store?
Absolutely. I've heard for years now, I've been told that we're going to end up being best friends on cars and guitars and all the other things in the world. So I've been really excited to be able to finally sit down with you. So, so a couple fun questions.
Okay, yep.
So, of course, we're sitting here. This is in our secondary building-ish
Yep.
with some of the car collection. We're both car and guitar guys,
Yep.
right? They tend to be
And maybe
commonly,
watches too?
yes,
There's a commonality there.
as you noticed, yeah.
Yep.
So they tend to be common hobbies, I guess
Yep.
you would say.
Yep.
So why do you think there's such a strong relationship between the two industries?
It's a good question. You know, and let's admit it, it's more of a guy thing,
It is,
right? So that kind of begs the question, what do guys like?
right?
Cars, guitars, watches, and maybe
Mechanical
that's the
stuff.
simple answer.
Exactly.
You know? And you go back, there was a great exhibit at the Peterson, and it was rock and roll and guitars, rock and roll and cars. And one of the coolest exhibits was Neil Young's barn find Corvette as found, with hay all over it and dust. And so it goes back, you know, a long time. And traveling musicians, you make a little money. You think about a lot of those people that ended up in LA back in the 60s, they made some big money pretty quickly. And they enjoyed themselves, buy a nice house up in the hills in a Porsche or a Ferrari or whatever. Yeah.
Rock stars going
Yep.
all the way back,
Right.
going straight to a car. So speaking of, what was your first car?
My first car I bought with some friends. I think I bought it, but they had a driver's license. It was like, well, I had the money and they had the driver's license. It was a Beetle. Because I got a chance to look at the questions, but more importantly to me was the first car that I had that my best friend Matt and I went on our first epic road trip in. That's the car I remember. The Beetle was just, it was my first car, but I never went on a real road trip. And I had a Volkswagen bus, and that was great because it was as fast uphill as it was downhill. So my first road car, if you can remember them, was a Chevy Monza.
Oh my gosh.
It had that really cool aerodynamic shape. It was an automatic because they only came with an automatic, but it had a small block V8, so it was peppy.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I had the car, my friend Matt had the time, and so 2 summers in a row, we would start in Nazareth and drive pretty quickly through the Midwest. And then when we got to the West, we went all over. And I still have, I was thinking about this at home, I have the Rand McNally that every day I would drive, you know, right in the, and so whenever we reminisce, we go, remember that 11,000 mile drive we did one summer? I was like, yeah, we did it twice. And then I had another cool car, was my kind of work car before I got my 944S. Remember the X series GM products that were terrible reputation?
Horrible.
I had a Buick X series sport coupe with a stick shift.
That was a cool
car. Boxy car. And everyone's like, it has a stick shift. The coolest thing, and to talk about GM's quality control, on the back it said sport coupe, but they put the decal on wrong. So like the S was not aligned with the P. It was like, and I would point to people, it's like, this is why the Japanese are eating our lunch, right here, this decal.
It was the dark days of
But
GM.
I put a lot of miles on it until he just gave up the ghost. And the guy that worked on it, he said, Chris, let it go. Let it go. You're just throwing good money after bad.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny that you mentioned the road trip in your car, and that's the car that's more memorable to you.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that always links to me, cars and guitars, because to me, it's the journey that you end up going on. Like if you have that guitar and you go on tour with it, you never want to sell that guitar, right? That's something that's really important to you. Kind of similar to cars also, you know, for me is that it's the memories I made in them. That
And my
really make
mom
them
and
special.
dad, they did hill climbs.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, near where I live, they would go to Springtown. There was a big hill climb in Reading. I still have one of my mom's.
I've been to the Reading Hill Climb.
I have my mom's silver cup that she won the hill climb in her Morgan with.
No way.
And so my mom and dad bonded over cars briefly before they got divorced.
Wow. That's the coolest mom ever that drove a Morgan and a hill climb. That's the coolest thing. So in the Martin household, I'm sure there was plenty of guitars around, but what was your first guitar?
So full disclosure, Chris Martin does not play the guitar. Well, Chris Martin from Coldplay does, but this Chris Martin doesn't. So parents are divorced, living in New Jersey with my mom and her grandparents, her dad, my grandfather, Dr. Sims was a doctor, and I wanted a guitar. So Christmas, I'm 10 years old. My grandfather and father say, what do you want for Christmas? Naturally, I want a guitar. And what do they do? And as is often happens with kids, well, we'll start them out on nylon strings, okay? So I have a 518 with nylon strings, and my mom arranges for me to get lessons with Mr. Conrad. He had a little music store in Lyndhurst, but he gave lessons in his home. So she said, Tuesday, I'm gonna drop you off. I go down the basement, get my little case. And I don't know if he knew who I was or not, because he was kind of like, Martin guitar there. I'm like, yeah, you know how to play? No, I don't play. So I'm thinking Beatles, right? So I was born in 55, so this is 65, thinking Beatles. He sees that it's a nylon string guitar, and he pulls out this thing, and he goes, put your foot on there. Now I want you to sit like this. I want you to hold the guitar and put your thumb on the back of the neck. And I'm going to myself, I've never seen any of the Beatles ever play the guitar this way. And unfortunately, it was one of those situations where he taught me to read, but we never really bonded as teacher and student, and I never practiced. I have a lot of guitars. I collect guitars. And at work, I'm surrounded by guitar players who are extremely opinionated, and I try and listen and distill their opinions into something that makes sense.
Well said. Well said. So, on the note of collecting things, so you're a collector of other cool items like watches and art. We already talked about watches a little bit. Since we do a lot of collection management stuff here at Ish Guitars, I always like to ask collectors, like, what's your collecting philosophy? Like, what's the thing that really makes a piece special to you? No matter what it is, if it's a car, a guitar, a piece of art, a watch.
So I love auctions. And it was back, before COVID, there were a lot of live auctions. And it was something I would do on a Saturday, go to live auction. The one thing I never did was bought a pickup truck, because I knew if I had a pickup truck, I would buy more stuff. And then, I've traveled all over the world during my career. And can I bring this home? Can it fit in my carry-on? So, think about the things I've collected over time. Folk art. I love the fact that here's someone inspired to make art, even though they were not trained to make art. Iridescent art glass. My sister is a glass blower, and just the whole idea of, and she goes, Dad, not Dad, Chris, my sister, she goes, you have to be really careful today when you make iridescent glass. I said, why? Because the fumes are noxious. But back in the day,
nobody knew.
So I have a bit of a respect for the fact that this, craftspeople kind of put their health at risk to make this beautiful. I remember once going to the Corning studio and watching them make and it wasn't iridescent, they make the lead glass. But what really fascinated me about, it was a team, right? It takes a team to blow glass. And they spend 30 minutes making this piece, and they're all looking at it, and they bring over, it must have been the QA guy, he comes over, he goes, and they just threw it away, start all over. So that's when I respect, hey, people put a lot of work into this. One of probably our biggest export market is Japan. And I'm like, why? Why would the Japanese want to buy Martin guitars? I've been going to Japan since I was in my teens. And because I like craft, I would go to the craft stores where they sold high-end Japanese souvenirs. And that's where I'm like, oh my gosh, they love meticulously crafted things. So I will tell a funny story. Now we've kind of weaned them off of this. All right, we're making our annual trip to Japan, kind of jet lagged. It's the first day of work. We go to the office, have a cup of coffee, the first of like 9 cups of coffee that day. And a little chit chat, and then they go, we have a serious quality issue. And I look at our sales rep, it was Rick or whoever, And I'm like, did you know about this? He goes, I did not know about this. And they pull out 6 cases. And they open them up and they just stand there. And Rick and I are, and I'm looking, and Rick's looking, and I'm looking, and Rick's looking, and we're like, and they go, do you see that? Do you see? And I'm going, well, now that you pointed it out, I do. But
yeah,
but that's when I realized they're our best critics. And if it passes their muster, we're good to go.
That's amazing. That's amazing. We're familiar with some of that too. I have a huge respect for the Japanese quality and craft, because they're so much, like you're saying, so much more interested in craftsmanship, it seems like, versus brand name, right? Which is a very cool thing to me. Fascinating. So Martin's always been founded on its history and tradition. More recently, you guys have been starting to come out with some more innovative products. They've really been hitting the market. They've been taking the industry by storm. What was the motivation to start pushing some of those boundaries?
So I will say that was my colleagues.
Okay.
That I have to give them credit, because I am kind of the keeper of the historical keys. And I'm more interested, in fact, tonight when we talk, where I'm focused right now in terms of continuing to learn is about the Hawaiian music craze in the teens and the 20s. And I'll tell a story about one of the guitars we have here tonight that we're going to introduce in the fall. But it's my colleagues that, you know, you get to a point, and Tomo are the principal of our distributor in Japan. We're talking now about, you know, the currencies, the Japanese, the yen is weak, and, you know, what's the future look like? And he said, we're not sure in Japan. The Japanese are very traditional when it comes to guitars. He said, we have sold everyone we know either a D28 or a D18, because that's, why wouldn't you?
It's the guitar.
So I think if we want to move beyond who we are, it's risky, right? And some of these products, they will have a life and they will decline. But yet it's worth trying. And the other thing is the technology today, the technology available to do these kind of things was not available for my ancestors. They couldn't dream about what's in the inception, putting the little things in the braces. You couldn't do that without lasers and CNCs.
Yep.
And
yeah, some really super advanced tech.
So a funny story about what's the ultimate of new product. And so Claire's friend's dad is a guitar collector, and we're over at his house, and he goes, I gotta show you this new Fender I got. And I'm looking at it, go, looks like a Stratocaster to me. And he said, turn it around. I turn it around, and there's this hole in the back. You know, what's that for? He pulls this box out. He goes, you can insert these little modules in the hole, and they plug in, and it makes it sound like a particular type of Stratocaster. I go, that's really cool. He goes, yeah, that's why I bought it. So cool. So I'm at a NAMM board meeting, and one of my fellow NAMM board members, Richard McDonald, works for Fender. He's retired. I said, Richard, tell me about that really cool thing with the modules. He goes, oh man, Chris, that was such a fun project. We spent so much time and money developing those things. He goes, witch's hat. I go, witch's hat? Yeah, the sales went like this, and then they went like that. So that's the risk. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't stop trying.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And what I see with luthiers, individual luthiers, is they have a lot more freedom than any of us who have a historical brand do. They can do really wild and crazy stuff that if we did it, people might go, yeah, Chris has gone too wild and crazy.
And that's why it's such an interesting question to me, right? Because when you have these big guitar brands, you know, I mean, you guys especially are some of the, you know, the oldest, right? But a lot of these brands are legacy brands now, where you can't just come up with crazy stuff and throw it at the wall.
Henry
you know,
Jeskowitz found that out.
Yes, he did.
Because he wanted to be the wacky inventor who was running Gibson, and the customers were like, Henry, we don't want a wacky inventor running Gibson.
Exactly. and Martin's doing it very well, right? So it's really cool to see
it's
that
nice
happen.
when they work. The mini bass, I thought that was cool. Mini bass sales have slowed way down. And it's a niche of a niche, right? First of all, we're not known as a bass guitar maker. It's an acoustic bass. It has a pickup. It's kind of a travel bass. I'm a little disappointed that didn't get a little more pickup, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
So
Us bassists are kind of weird like that.
Okay. And then what I love is when you talk to someone about, because we're in the string business, and the idea of strings is we want you to change them. But when you talk to a bass player, they go, they aren't even broken in for 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, they're burying their strings in the backyard or something. Right. So everyone's concerned about climate change these days, which I think
Not
is
everyone.
actually...
Let's admit, not everyone
not
is concerned
everyone.
about climate change.
A lot more than before, and I think that's a
Yes.
great thing that
Yes.
people are starting to realize that. So Martin's always been a leader in sustainability. I mean, even I remember I saw an article about you guys doing a new HVAC system that was super impressive and amazing for the factory and very efficient. So what's the next step for Martin? How do you go even further with sustainability?
I think what's going to happen is that, there's a reason they're called rare exotic tone woods, and they are becoming more so. That, and I don't want anyone to misinterpret this, but I think that domestic hardwoods, alternative materials will get more love as the traditional rare exotic hardwoods become harder to procure, difficult to transport across borders, wildly expensive. And I always say to people, I said, you want the best wood in the factory? It's called a D45. And even my colleagues, I said, look, we always want to keep the traditional woods for the ultra high-end guitars. But if someday we have to use different woods, even on a D28, blasphemy, we're going to do it. Yeah. And I think part of it's going to be pricing and availability. That those traditional woods. So we're working on a guitar now with koa, and I was shocked to find out how expensive koa wood is.
Oh yeah.
And that's a wood we've used for over 100 years. But that's going to, people are going to say, wait a minute, do I need to spend that much? And it still says Martin. We still stand behind it, and it's not big, crazy money. I just think it's, part of it's going to be pricing. That over time, people are going to, because right now, give me rosewood, give me mahogany, give me ebony, it's like, fine, these woods are hard to get. And the paperwork is crazy.
Yep. And you're well positioned because you have a lot of sustainable materials that are already built into the Martin lineup. So going forward, hopefully.
But they've struggled to get traction.
Wow.
We've been making guitars out of cherry from a family-owned forest in Western Pennsylvania that's been run sustainably for generations. And that guitar doesn't get a lot of love.
We actually just had one of those, and it sold very well. And
there you go.
It was one of our favorite guitars at the shop. And we just were talking about it at our meeting about the Martin event.
That's good to hear.
And we loved it.
Good.
And the story, see, to me, that's a story that's fascinating, right? A true generational family farm, sustainable, harvesting cherry, local to...
From Pennsylvania,
local to Martin guitars. To me, that's the guitar I want.
Yep.
That's just so cool.
I don't think people realize domestic hardwoods regenerate quicker than tropical hardwoods. We're helping to plant saplings, when we can work closely with the people in the supply chain. And what I tell people is, yes, we're, facilitating, to try and get indigenous people to understand if you decide, you get permission to cut that big old tree down, don't raise cattle, because then no trees will grow. And they're like, well, how long is it going to take? And I'll say, well, if you planted it today, maybe by the time Claire is my age, maybe. And they're like, we don't have time. So what, people that are trying to facilitate this discussion are saying, that's the mother tree. Around that tree, you plant fruit and nut trees. And then you can sustain your life, your income with the fruit and nut trees while you wait and wait for that mahogany tree to grow.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
The other thing is talking to the people that harvest these woods about, if you make a logging road 4 lanes wide, you're never going to have trees grow on those 4 lanes. Make the logging road just wide enough for a truck with a couple of pull-out places and let Mother Nature do her work. I believe there is a point where trees should be harvested, right? And what better use for a tree that deserves to be harvested than to make a guitar?
Well said. Well said. So, Martin Strings.
Yep.
You've really dominated the acoustic market
Yeah.
for a few decades now, really. And it's interesting because it seems normal to us these days to have a guitar manufacturer that has its own string brand, right? But most guitar makers either didn't make their own strings or still don't make their own strings. They just slap a brand on them or a label on them.
Yep.
What made you want to get in the string business?
So, not growing up in the family business, there still are all these questions I wish I had asked. But a gentleman named Greg Hutton compiled information from our archives and came out with a book. And it's basically, here's the book of archival material from Martin. So I get the book and I'm reading all about the guitars. And we've just recently hired a gentleman to help us re-energize our string business. And I thought, I need to brush up on my knowledge of Martin strings. C.F. Martin Sr. made guitar strings.
Really?
Yeah. Then we got out of it. Then we would buy them and package them ourselves. My dad, back during the folk and folk rock boom, company was throwing off cash, made 4 acquisitions. He bought Fives drums, Vega banjos, and Levin guitars. They were in Sweden. Those 3 acquisitions ultimately failed. He bought the Darko String Company from the D'Addarios. And it's like, wait a minute, what's that old saying about the razor and the razor blade, right? Unfortunately, my father and Mr. D'Addario Sr. did not get along. So they split. And it's a funny story. Someone comes to my dad and goes, Frank, did you know that the D'Addarios are thinking about getting back into the string business? Don't we have a non-compete with them? Now, non-competes are in the news right now, right?
Of course.
But back then, and my dad goes, yeah, but we're not going to exercise the non-compete because nothing's going to come of it.
Oh, man.
And the advantage they have is they are known as a string maker. We're known, if people know we make strings, they know us because we make strings for acoustic flat top steel string guitars. We can make great electric guitar strings. We struggle to market them. But yeah, it's a nice business. It's profitable. It's a precision business. You're into machines. It's all about, really good machinery, really good raw material. Okay, here's a funny story. So my colleagues go to the wire show. They come back and, how did it go at the wire show? They go, same old, same old. I said, what do you mean? They said, the problem is we're wearing our Martin logo. We walk into a wire vendor. They go, oh yeah, guitar strings. Nah, not interested. Oh, but you make wire. You make all. And they're like, yeah, we know you guys. Do you understand that we make wire for people that don't care what it looks like? You care what the wire looks like. Everybody else wraps that wire in plastic or hides it in a car, puts it in a tire. They wouldn't want to do business with us. So buying guitar string wire is really complicated today because there's only a handful of people on earth that draw the wire and do it so that it's attractive looking.
That's fascinating.
Yeah,
I never would have guessed that was the challenge.
But it's all done on lathes. It's all precision. It's metalworking. And it's got to be done precisely.
So is a wire mill in the future of Martin guitars?
Well, we talk about vertical integration. We do buy some of our wire from the D'Addarios because they did vertically integrate. I don't know anything about that business.
Yeah.
And I've come to the conclusion I'm willing to invest my family's money in a business that I know something about. I know nothing about drawing wire, and I don't know if I want to take the time to learn.
It's good wisdom. That's good wisdom. So most of the biggest names of the last 100 years have played Martin guitars.
Not exclusively all the time, but
of course.
Yep.
In your opinion,
yeah,
who's been the most influential Martin artist?
It varies by time, right? You go back into the 1800s, and someone will go, William Foden. If I mentioned William Foden tonight at the event, people would be like, who?
I don't know who that is.
But back in the 1800s, William Foden was the guy, or Alcott Bickford, right? Who knows? Or Madame Dagoni. And then you get, into the 30s and you've got the country stars. So back to Japan. We've had a very good relationship with Eric Clapton, right? And what he liked about the artist model program was the fact that he could help design a guitar. And he's picky. He knew what he wanted. Sometimes we would make him a guitar and he goes, close but no cigar. And we're like, got a trade show coming up. Make me another one. The artist model program basically says you get to help design or guitar tech. Of course, you get one. You get to buy a couple for friends and family. Then we're going to sell the rest through the dealer and distribution network. And we're going to take part of the proceeds from those sales and give it to a charity of your choice. And he has that rehabilitation center in the Caribbean. So that's where the money has gone over the years. So back to Japan. The Japanese do a survey. And the survey was, in Japan, who is your acoustic guitar hero? And statistically, you go, well, that's a weird way to look at it. But they basically, when I talked to them, they said, in Japan, based on the survey we did, Eric Clapton is everyone's first hero, and second hero, and third hero, and fourth hero. So I'm going to go with Eric Clapton.
Very interesting. I did not see that coming.
I know. And when I was over, Craig and I were over a month ago, and Tomo said Eric's coming back because he loves to play in Japan. He loves the reception he gets. And they said he's not touring a lot, but the last time that he was there, he said, I'm coming back next year.
Wow, yeah. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Do you have an artist that you would love to see playing a Martin that isn't currently?
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a challenge. And I don't know if you saw the interview that Paul Reed-Smith did with him. One of my favorite guitarists on earth is John McLaughlin. And I remember that years ago, he commissioned an acoustic guitar with the scalloped fingerboard so he could bend the frets better.
Oh, I don't remember.
I've never seen a picture of him with a Martin. I'd like to think that somewhere at home in his den, he has a Martin guitar, but because he's one of my musical heroes. And then there's other people that got connected to one of my competitors early on. And so when you see them in public, they're playing another brand, but yet when you get a behind the scenes picture, you can often see them with their Martin. Mm-hmm. Oh, here's a good one. Garth Brooks, big Takamine endorsee, right? They did the one with the guitar-shaped sound hole, which was really cool. You go to the Country Music Hall of Fame, Garth Brooks exhibit, the Martin guitar he wrote all his songs on. But what I like about the fact that there's room for not just Martin, that there's room for other companies. It's a pretty collegial business. It's, we're competitors, and there's things we cannot say to each other. But, over the years, I've hired people from outside the industry. And Steve Carletti. Steve worked for Newell. And we're at the first NAMM show. And I'm bopping around, and Bob Taylor comes in the booth, and Paul Reed-Smith comes in the booth. And Steve comes up to me, he goes, isn't Bob your competitor? I go, yeah. He goes, in our industry, we never went to the competitor's booth. We never acknowledged they existed. He was shocked how collegial the guitar building business is.
That's one of the reasons why I'm in this business.
Isn't it fun? Yeah.
It's like all of our best friends are other shop owners.
And, particularly with Taylor, Bob and Kurt recognized that, hey, we're not going to beat Martin on their history. Their quality is great. We're going to beat them on playability. And the advantage they had is they started with a clean sheet of paper. So now it's like, okay, how do we adapt this old design with this dovetail joint to compete to make Martin guitars more playable? And that was a journey. My favorite comment in the call report, we get call reports from the reps in the field. My favorite comment was when whoever said, I got a complaint from one of my dealers that the action is too low. I said, we arrived. we made it.
So speaking of Taylor, it was funny because when I asked you that question, I looked off camera at Claire because we talked about what artist she wants to see playing a Martin guitar. And of course, it's Taylor Swift.
Yeah. So very fortunate, I got invited to the Fishin' Musicians thing. So in the fall, a whole bunch of people from our industry, they've been doing it for 30 years. They go fishing. Sometimes they come upstate New York, up into Canada, but they've found it to be a little more reliable if they go out west. So I go out last year, we go to Missoula, fished on the Bitterroot. It's really, really great. Fred Bermonti's there from Fred's Music in Reading. I go, Fred. He goes, Chris, I know, I had no choice. I said, you were a Martin dealer before you sold the store. I was a loyal Martin dealer. I said, Fred. He goes, Chris, I'm so sorry, but when Taylor Swift walked into my store and saw a guitar with the name Taylor on it, I could not talk her out of it. So Fred sold Taylor Swift her first Taylor guitar.
That's so funny. Well, maybe someday.
We'll see, right? Yeah.
Who knows? What's your favorite tone wood and why?
Yeah, I'll be selfish, and we just found some with reliable paperwork. There is something, you take a piece of Brazilian rosewood and you tap it. I mean, talk about a bell tone. There's a reason people use Brazilian rosewood to make guitars. So I'm going to go with Brazilian rosewood.
And trust me, I've been in the custom shop and I've seen your little stash up there.
Right.
I always ask them to pull it out and they're like, nope. He says he can't touch it.
There's a price on that, right? We haven't had anyone bite yet. But there's a price.
There's a price on everything.
And we are using some of that wood for the 2.5 millionth guitar. I think the one that we have here is from my stash.
That's your personal Brazilian stash.
I think that is, yeah, I think that one is. And we're working now on number 3 million, and I think they're going to pull from my stash for that, yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Good to know.
2.5 million is not for sale.
For someone who's trying to get into guitar building, teching, starting a guitar shop, working at a guitar store like Ish Guitars, what's your one piece of advice in this industry?
So I know more about the building side than I do the retail side. I have a great deal of respect for those of you that work in retail. My advice to someone that says, I want to become a guitar builder. Okay, you can go to school. You can come to Martin and learn to build guitars, but it's going to take 20 years because we're a factory. And you're going to do this job for a year and that job for a year. My advice is learn how to repair guitars because that will pay the rent. And you come out of guitar building school, and just because you can build a guitar does not mean someone wants to buy it from you because they've never heard of you. You come out of guitar building school having learned how to repair guitars, you can get a job very quickly in a music store, or you can set up your own shop, and then you can build guitars that maybe someday you will sell. But in the meantime, you're paying the rent and you're eating.
Very important thing.
Right.
Thank you so much for
my pleasure.
talking with us,
So
Chris.
cool to be here.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.